How we doing today, neighbors? Ian with eTrailer here. Today we're going to be taking a look at the Roadmaster Universal Wiring Kit on our 2017 Chevrolet Equinox. Let's get into a couple features of that kit and then the install. Now there's going to be 5 main components that we need to go over for any flat tow setup, and we'll start with the base plate, which is going to be our anchor point on the vehicle, allowing us to hook up to the tow bar. The tow bar is going to be our connection point that's going to be drawing that behind our RV here, and then we'll have our trailer wiring and then our braking system to include that safety release cable to keep us safe when we're headed down the road and we have a catastrophic disconnect. This will pull and then bring the vehicle to a nice steady stop. Now we are going to have multiple options when it comes to this kit, but all of those options are the same once you get past the wiring here at the front plug of the vehicle. So everything from here back is all set up the exact same way. The only difference with the kits is going to be the type of connector plugs you're going to have and the wiring for your turn signals, tail lights, and brake lights. And with the kit we've got today, it was the 4 to 7 way option with the coil, but the neighbor wanted to keep the existing wiring they already had, so we've kind of mocked that up in a different way. I did want to be able to show the differences between some of the cables. So again, we had the kit with the coiled end here. There are options with the straight cable, so that way, depending on which type of tow bar you have, whether it's got the channels for the straight or if you'd like to use the coiled to be able to wrap that around the tow bar, we've got options for both. Now with that wiring, the intent of that is to be able to give us our clearance lights, our turn signals, and then the brake lights as well. So that way when we're headed down the road, everybody's going to be aware of what we're doing and that we do have a towed vehicle behind the RV. And before we get into the install on this one, I did kind of want to talk about the diodes that we're going to be putting in at the rear of the vehicle. I wouldn't say all of the wiring and getting everything installed is all that difficult. It's just a little time consuming and tedious, and you do want to make sure you take your time when you're identifying the wires behind the taillights, and I'm going to walk you through that whole process. Those diodes in there are intended to prevent any type of backfeed that you may have either from this vehicle or up at the RV coming back to your OEM wiring here, and they're going to help prevent any type of damage caused by maybe a short or some electrical issue that would affect either the RV or your towed vehicle. Those diodes, even if you choose to get rid of your towed vehicle, can still live behind the taillights, and it's not going to cause any issues for the next owner of the vehicle, so that may be something you need to factor in as well. But as far as the install, I'm going to walk you through it all now, but if you happen to watch this video and you find this isn't something you want to try to tackle, please do check out the Dealer Locator Network. We'd be happy to get you a trained professional in your area that can help get this installed for you. But for all those DIYers, let's go ahead and hop into it. To start the installation, we need to take our spool of 4-pole wiring here. I'm going to show you how to route it and my particular path that I picked, but this is going to be up to your creativity. Of course, you do want to avoid any hot or moving parts as we're going back, and the best thing to do is get it all ran and then put up all your zip ties to secure it in place. So we're going to start at the front of the vehicle. We've already put on our base plate here for this neighbor, and we followed up along the front of the radiator back behind the fascia, since we had the fascia off for our base plate, and routed that up into the engine compartment. Then we followed one of the supports for our radiator coming back behind the battery and then behind the washer pump inlet, around our reservoir here, and then back down behind the fuse panel. Now once we've got to the fuse panel, down below we've followed the firewall, and there's some existing brake lines coming off of the brake system that allowed us to follow down, and we'll go ahead and hop under the vehicle to take a look at where it's routed underneath. And now that we're underneath, you can see here where I've got this tied to the existing brake lines, following those back along each bracket And what you'll want to do is just make sure you're not drooping that down to where it can catch on anything coming underneath the vehicle if you happen to pass over something. And still coming down the brake lines here to the end, right next to this tank. From the tank, we've gone above the axle and above the sway bar up in this hole, still tying to existing harnessing coming back to the rear of the vehicle. And then I wanted to talk about when we get to this point at the rear of the vehicle, because you'll see the green wire is following a red wire across, and we're going to talk later on about the red wire, but we'll talk about the green one in the bundle. Once you've got to the rear of the vehicle, the only three that need to go up are going to be that white, brown, and yellow on the left side, and then on the right we're going to make sure we take the green wire over there along with an additional jumper that you'll need. Now with our harness back here under the rear of the vehicle, we're going to focus on our taillights and getting those out of the way. They're the same removal procedure for both, but I'm going to show you here on the passenger side how to do so. We've got these two black plastic caps that will need to come off, so you just pry from the bottom on those and they'll fall out, and we'll set those off to the side. And underneath there's going to be two 10mm bolts that we'll need to remove. With those two 10mm bolts removed, what we want to do, I like to press my body up against the outside of it while I'm pushing forwards towards the rear of the vehicle, and just kind of give that a little wiggle at the same time. It'll start to work its way loose, and then you can get around that back edge and pull. And then there's going to be our connection point. There's only a single connection point to it. Just push down on that tab, give that a pull, and it'll come loose, and we'll set this somewhere safe for now. So you will have to test at the plug to see which of the wires coming out of the factory harness are going to be your turn and brake signal and then your tail light signal, because those are the two we're looking for back here. For us, the yellow and black wire coming out of the factory harness was that brake and turn signal here on the driver's side. And so we've got that hooked up to the second blade of our end point, so that's feeding this diode. And then we've got that continuation of the rest of the wire coming out of the outlet of that diode and into the plug corresponding with that yellow and black wire. Now we do have our brown wire, which is going to be hooked to our tail lights, and that's where that jumper is going to come into play as well, because on the diode for the tail lights, one of them is going to have this yellow butt connector that works exactly like these blue ones will, and you're going to crimp in not only the brown wire coming from the harness that goes to the front of the vehicle, but also that jumper lead that needs to go over to the passenger side. And also with that one, we found the brown wire coming out of the factory harness was our feed line for taillights on this side, so we fed that into the second blade on the inlet side of the diode, and coming out of the diode again, just like we did with the other wire, we've got that continuation to the plug. One other thing worth mentioning on this ground wire is, yes, we are tapped into the chassis, and so that should stay a good ground, but if we do happen to have the situation where this ends up with some corrosion on it, since it is just an exposed eyelet tapped directly into that chassis, we like to throw a second ground in line with this particular ground, and what I've done is done it up front in the engine bay. So let's go ahead and hop up there. I'll show you how I've done it. It's not something you have to do, but we do recommend it just to avoid any grounding issues. And right up here in the engine bay, we've pulled that white wire away from the other three and then added an additional butt connector that was large enough to put one more jumper lead in, and then I've ran that to an eyelet directly on the battery negative, so that way if we do have issues in the rear with that chassis ground, we've still got a really good functioning ground very early on in the kit. Now that we've addressed that driver's side there, we're going to talk about the passenger side, and I'm going to show you how to hook those diodes up to the blade connectors. But first we've got to get our wiring over to the passenger side. Again, we've got our green wire broken off from the main harness going up on that driver's side, and that's going to follow us along with the red wire that we're going to be using as the jumper lead going to our tail lights. And both of those I've got tucked into a loom harness here that will allow us to get it over there safely without any debris or anything catching on it. That is not included with the kit, so you would have to pick that up from us along with the rest of your order. And following those wires, we've got that down up above the exhaust tip here, following our hitch all the way across, and then up and over, and we're going to go over the tailpipe again, and we'll need to access the pocket here between the rear fascia and the body. So it's going to be the same on both sides, and I'm going to show you how to get that wire from down here up to our tail light. As I'd mentioned, this is going to be the same on both sides, so easier just to show on the one. We're going to be looking for this small hole on the inside where we can drop either a piece of wire or just something to be able to tie that harness to down below. And once we've got that down there, we can just reach under the edge here. Make sure you're clear of all your obstructions underneath, and the routing is going to be fine there. We'll take the end of our wires here and tape those to that fish line. And once we've got that taped, you can just pull on that fish line and get those up to the top. We'll remove those. Now our testing procedure to indicate which is going to be our tail and turn signal is going to be done with a circuit tester like we've got here. If you need to, you can pick that up from a local auto parts store or us here at etrailer.com. And what we're going to do is have somebody up front running our lights, and we'll need to identify here at the pins which wire is corresponding to which signal. So if we start here on the right, we'll see we don't have anything coming from that. That second one, also nothing. So that third one in, we've got obviously our tail lights here, which is going to be just that on constant power for that. And on our far left, we've got our turn signal. So all we have to do is just go to the corresponding wire on top, which our turn and brake signal is going to come out of this teal wire with the white stripe. And just like on the driver's side, we've got our brown wire for our tail lights. Now we'll take the green wire and one of the blade terminals off of the diode inside, and we're going to figure out where that's all going to live. So once we've got an idea, we're going to take that teal and white striped wire, kind of get a general place where that should be. You do want to leave just a little bit of slack in it, so we've got enough to hook this harness back up to the tail light. But we'll go ahead and cut that back. We're going to take a pair of wire strips and get that end cleaned up. And with that cleaned up, you'll take the blade connector and we're going to twist this wire. And then that open hole, this will sit over the wire. Then you'll want to give that a nice firm crimp. Then once you got that crimp, just give it a little tug to make sure that's snug on that. Now we have our other two connection points on our diode we need to worry about, so I'm going to pull off our inlet first. And we're going to take that green and teal wire. There may be a little bit of tape here that you can peel back to get more of that wire and make this easier for you. And like we had before, we just want to make sure we've got enough to be able to still move our plug around. And we'll cut that teal and white wire and strip those ends back. We're going to take our 2 remaining blade connectors and get those crimped onto the ends. Now we'll take the diode, and on the inside of that, where it's got the 2 blade connectors, we're going to use the green wire from the harness coming from that driver's side. Go ahead and get that hooked up, and then we'll take the wire coming off of the plug that we put the blade connector on, and that's going to go on the out. And those just push firmly onto those blades. And last but not least, we've got that last blade on our inside, and that's going to be the harness that was feeding the plug originally. And we'll slide that one over the blade as well. Now we're going to repeat the exact same process as we did with our brake and turn signal wires, but this time we're going to be using that jumper wire that we ran over from the driver's side for the tail light. And you'll be able to remove the cover for the adhesive and just go ahead and stick that centered up with the other diode to help kind of keep those as one unit. We've already got all the blade connectors off of it, and we're going to come to the brown wire about where we did with that green and white. And we'll cut that one just the same and strip back those ends. We're going to treat that like we did the green one and get that stripped and get an additional blade connector crimped onto that. Now we'll take that jumper wire we've got, and that's going to go on one of the blades of the inside of the diode. And we'll turn our attention to the brown wire ends where we need to get our blade connectors crimped onto those. We'll start with the one that's coming out of the factory harness that would have been feeding the plug. And that will go into the end marked in. And then same situation for our wire coming off the plug. Get that blade terminal crimped, and that will go on the outside. Now we're going to take our diode set that we've got, remove the adhesive off the back, clean up a little spot for that to live, again making sure you're avoiding any obstructions that may cause the taillight not to sit in place. And we'll go ahead and stick that right to the body, making sure we've still got access to where the plug can be plugged into the taillight. Now before we put the taillights back on, we do need to seal up these ends just to make sure that we don't have any corrosion later on down the road, since these are going to have access to the weather. So just take a little bit of RTV and seal those ends up around the wires. Now, as you're putting the tail light in, this first time you may have to adjust where the diodes are living. There's quite a bit of space behind these in different areas, and it can be a little tricky to figure that out. So just take your time getting those back into place, and make sure you've got that plug snapped back on where it needed to be as you go into place. And as we're pushing this into place, so there's going to be one tab on the bottom that needs to slide in, and then those 2 additional pins coming up the side, one in the middle and one in the back, and that'll really get that set where it needs to be. And then we'll be able to replace those 10mm bolts that hold the tail light in place, and we'll put the covers back on. When you're putting these plastic covers back on, you're going to have a tab that sticks out, and then the locking tab. That locking tab is going to be on the bottom. So start it by putting the extended tab up into place, and then pushing on the bottom of that plastic cover. Now back at the front of the vehicle, I've already got our wiring pulled through the bracket that was provided with the base plate that we put on. If you don't happen to have this particular bracket, you can always order one of the long or short brackets from our website, and those can suffice to be able to hold this in place. So just make sure you look into that as an option. And with all of the brackets in place, we'll need to make a nice big loop right behind this plug. The intent of that is for there to be enough wire that if we ever needed to do any maintenance on the plug itself, we've got more than enough to work with post installation. Now we'll need to separate the 4 wires so we can get those attached to the plug. So just snip down in between each one, and then you can take a pair of pliers, grab each wire individually and pull those away. We're just going to get probably about a 2 to 3 inch lead there that we need to hook up to the back of the plug. And we'll strip each of those back at the end. Now before we hook up our plug, what you're going to want to do is test at the RV to see what specifically is going to feed each end, and those will need to be corresponded to our wires here at the front. So once you've got that set up, kind of make yourself a list of how it's set up on the plug at the RV, how it's going to transfer through that cable and come to our 4-pole here. Now to take this plug apart, we will need to remove the small Phillips head on top of that. So you just unscrew that here. And make sure you hold on to that. Once it's come out, it's very, very easy to lose this teeny tiny screw. We'll set that aside for now. And once we've removed that screw there, you'll be able to push this out. So hold that lid open and then just push something through the back, and that whole assembly should come loose. And we'll take that out for now. We're going to run all 4 of our wires through the plug-in to start, so that way we don't have to take our bracket back apart or take any of these wires loose. Just run that through. Pull all of those out enough. We've got plenty to work with. And then we're going to turn our attention to this small plug here. It's going to have this small insert that we'll take off for now, giving us access to all of our connection points and the small Phillips head that are going to be our retention for the wires. Now we'll take our little black insert that came on the back of this and slide that over the 4 wires before we go to hook up all of the connections. Now you'll have your nut that was the retention point for the small screw on the case cover, and that's going to be our up facing point, so it's easy to keep your orientation of where these pins are going to be according to that. And we're going to hook these wires up to these rear sets, all just according to the template we made from our wiring off of the RV. So you'll back out the small set screws here, and you'll just want to go 1 wire at a time and get those into the pin position that is required for that particular signal, whether it be the ground, either of our brake and turn signals, or that tail lamp signal. I'm going to start with our brown wire for the clearance lights, and you may find that if they're not twisted that you'll end up with these small pieces of wire sticking out. If that is the case, just pull it all back out, get that straightened back up, give those a good twist, so we don't want any exposed wire that could touch the other pins, causing any type of shorts. So I'm going to start with that clearance wire, and then you'll just tighten down the set screw. And like we did with the butt connectors, once you got that snug, just give it a little pull to make sure it is in place. Then I'm going to move on to the ground wire. And then our left brake and turn signal. And last but not least, our right brake and turn signal. Now the wires attached to their corresponding posts are secured, and we got those snugged up. You'll slide that little black casing back over that end, and then backfill that with some RTV to help keep the corrosion out. Once we've got that RTV in there, just go ahead and slide that harness all the way down to the end. And then we'll get the attachment point lined up with the top of that plug holder. Get that securely pushed into place, then get the line, and then get the line up here at the hole, so you can just kind of rotate that and move that in the plug as need be. And then we'll put the retainer screw back in. You may have to hold in the plug to get that to go into place. If you can get it started by hand, that helps as well. And then don't forget to make that nice big loop back behind the plug, and you'll want to zip tie all that extra wiring up. And we'll add our hardware to secure that to the bracket. Then we'll come back through, just make sure everything's tightened up, and we'll cut back any zip ties that we've got hanging off, and give this a good test at the RV to make sure it is functioning as intended. So while we're talking about the lights in the rear, I just wanted to run through. I'm up in the cab of the RV, and I'm going to be running through all of the functions. So here we've got just the clearance lights on, and then those clearance lights off. We're going to have our brake lights, and then our left and right turns. So that wiring harness is going to give us our full functions, so that way everyone behind us is aware that that towed vehicle is being towed and where we plan to move with our vehicles. And that's going to do for our look at and install of the Roadmaster Universal Wiring Kit on our 2017 Chevrolet Equinox. My name's Ian with eTrailer. Really appreciate you watching.